Story 1. I kept hearing footsteps on the roof, but I live on the top floor. This happened to me in late 2018, during one of those early spring storms that make the entire building feel porous. I was living alone in a 7th-floor apartment in downtown Seattle, top floor of an old brick complex built in the 1950s. No rooftop access, no attic, just me and the sky above. The storm started around 10 p.m. I remember because I'd just turned off the television and noticed the window panes starting to shiver slightly. Rain on glass is usually calming for me. But that night, something felt compressed. I couldn't explain it. Just a dense pressure in the air, like static about to snap. My place was small, living room, kitchen, single bedroom, wood floors, high ceiling, and this constant old building hum I'd gotten used to. You could always hear the neighbors plumbing, even when they just washed their hands. But that night, there was no sound from below, just the rain and that low, strange rumble above. Around 11:30, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it for the first time. Footsteps. Not from the hallway, not from the apartment next door, from directly above me. 3 slow steps. Pause. Then again. I stood frozen in the doorway between the bathroom and the living room, toothbrush still in hand. I told myself it was nothing. A pipe, water, shifting weight. But the sound didn't fit. There was rhythm to it. Weight, human gait. Not a leak, not a creak. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. Rain blurred everything outside. The rooftop edge was visible if I pressed my cheek against the glass. A flat concrete border and the sharp black line where the lightning rods met the sky. But I didn't see anything, just the outline of the city under layers of silver streaks. I stood there for a while, just listening. No more footsteps. I finished getting ready for bed, turned off the lights, and left one small lamp on in the hallway, a habit I'd kept since childhood. Something about having at least one corner of light made the dark feel less hungry. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it intensified. Around 1:15 a.m., I was half asleep when I heard the sound again. This time, longer. 4 steps. A pause, then 2 more, directly overhead. I sat up. My bedroom ceiling was blank, smooth plaster, no trapdoors or beams. I stared up into it like it could open. My heart wasn't racing yet. Not exactly, but my hands were cold. I got up, walked barefoot across the cool floor to the living room, and stood under the ceiling again. The sound had stopped. I turned off the fan, waited. Silence. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was just mistaking the acoustics of the storm. Rain can echo strangely between buildings, especially up high. I decided to sleep on the couch, not out of fear, just so I could hear better, I told myself. At 2:12 a.m., I woke to what I can only describe as dragging, like someone walking slowly, deliberately, their foot scuffing slightly between steps. The kind of gait you'd associate with someone injured or barefoot. It came from above. I didn't move. I just listened. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was too close, too patterned. I knew that roof wasn't accessible. There was no reason, no way. Someone could be up there, but my body didn't care about logic. My body was reacting. I grabbed my phone and opened the flashlight, then turned it off. I didn't want to light anything up, not yet. Instead, I stood in the middle of my apartment quietly, trying to map the sound. I counted 8 more steps, then nothing. I didn't go back to sleep. The next morning, I left the apartment and went to the building manager's office. I didn't bring up the footsteps directly. I just asked about roof access, tried to sound curious, casual. "It's sealed," she said, not even looking up. "Maintenance only. You'd need a special permit just to unlock it. There's nothing up there anyway. Just gravel, drain vents, and lightning rods." I nodded. "But there's a hatch?" "Yeah. In the hallway closet on 7. Bolted shut from the inside." That detail caught me. "Inside the closet?" She paused. "Inside the hatch." Later that afternoon, I walked back to my floor and stood in front of the closet at the far end of the hallway, the one next to the fire extinguisher cabinet. I'd passed it 100 times, but never thought to open it. The doorknob turned easily. Inside was a dusty metal shelf, some buckets, and a big square hatch on the ceiling, bolted shut. I pulled my phone out and took a picture of it. Then I looked closer. There were streaks on the edge of the bolt. Not scratches, smudges. Dark, damp marks, like something had dripped and been wiped. I touched one. It was wet. Rainwater? It hadn't rained since morning, and the closet was dry. But the hatch wasn't. There was something else. A faint metallic smell, like rust and sweat. Old water sitting in something that shouldn't hold water. That night, the rain returned. Not heavy this time. More of a steady curtain, slow and consistent. I decided I wasn't going to sleep. I stayed in the living room with the lights off, wrapped in a blanket, just listening. At 1:03 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps, slower this time. The exact same pattern as the night before. It felt like someone pacing a narrow rectangle, forward and back, stopping, waiting. Then again. I recorded the sound on my phone. Then I stood under the ceiling and tried to locate the source. My brain told me it was just the storm, maybe the building's expansion, the way water changes how sound travels. But my body was already shaking. At 1:28, the footsteps stopped. I walked to my front door, opened it as quietly as I could, and stepped into the hallway. The air felt cooler out there. Not cold, just slightly wrong. I crept to the closet again. The door wasn't latched. I opened it. The hatch was there, slightly ajar. The bolt was loose. I stared at it for a full minute. My body wouldn't move. My mouth tasted like metal. There were no sounds from inside, no footsteps. Just the hum of building silence and the rhythmic patter of rain far above. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't. I closed the closet door, slid the bolt across it, and went back inside. I didn't sleep. The following day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked up psychological forums, not paranormal ones, not conspiracies, just academic discussions on urban housing, sound anomalies. It's how I found the term environmental intrusion during liminal hours. A polite way of saying people hear things they shouldn't when rain removes the normal sounds that ground them. The article mentioned phantom pacing, reports from tenants living in older buildings with sealed upper levels, most of them during storms, almost always late at night. The author had a theory that in the absence of auditory landmarks, the mind tries to localize sound based on body position and memory. But when the source doesn't match any known category, footsteps where there is no floor, the body still reacts. First, long before logic catches up, it made sense, too much sense. That night the rain came back heavier. I locked every door, turned off every light, even the hallway lamp. I closed the door to my bedroom and shoved a chair under the knob. Not because I thought it would help, just so I'd know. I lay in bed fully dressed, phone in hand, but I didn't call anyone. At 2:44 a.m., I started hearing the rhythm again, but it wasn't footsteps this time. It was tapping from above, soft, measured, like fingers against concrete. 4 taps. Pause. Then 4 again. I counted the seconds between each group. It matched my pulse perfectly. I sat up, held my breath, and placed my hand against the wall. The tapping changed, matched again. I moved to the center of the room. It followed. I whispered, just once. Stop. It did. The room fell back into rain silence. I didn't move until dawn. The next morning I left, packed a bag and took a train to stay with my cousin across town. I returned once, a week later, just to collect the rest of my things. The building manager asked if I was breaking lease. I said yes. She didn't ask why. As I was leaving, she mentioned something odd, said the previous tenant in my unit also left abruptly. Didn't give a reason, just stopped paying rent and vanished. Left behind furniture, food in the fridge. She chuckled. City life gets to people sometimes. I nodded, said nothing. That was 6 years ago. To this day, I don't live above the 5th floor, and I still check every ceiling twice before going to bed, especially when it rains. Story 2. The man outside my window didn't move, even as the flood rose. This happened to me in the fall of 2022, during one of the worst rainstorms my city had seen in over a decade. I live in Baton Rouge, in an older ground-floor apartment on the west edge of the city. Not quite suburban, but not central enough to be monitored properly when things start flooding. My building is squat, brick-faced, and sits in a U-shape with a small concrete courtyard in the center. Every unit faces inward, with big sliding windows and short paths that lead directly to the sidewalk. Mine was Unit 103, first floor, front corner. The only reason I'd stayed there as long as I had was the rent, and because I didn't have anywhere else to go. The rain started on a Thursday night. At first, it was the usual kind of southern downpour, quick, hard, loud. But by midnight, it hadn't stopped. By 2 a.m., I noticed the water pooling in the concrete basin of the courtyard. At 3:14, I looked out my window and saw him, a man, standing just beyond the sidewalk, not moving, not hunched or shielding himself, just standing, still. At first, I assumed he was a neighbor, someone from another unit checking their car, maybe taking a smoke break, but there was something off about his posture, something that didn't match the tension of the weather. His arms hung straight, not tucked into his pockets, not folded, just loose like he'd been dropped there. I didn't look long. I turned off the lamp and went to bed. I told myself I imagined it. The next day, the rain kept falling, and by late afternoon, the water had crept up over the curb. It moved slow, not like a wave, but like breath. The parking lot was already underwater, and I could hear the sucking, bubbling sound of it seeping into the grass outside my window. At 6:30 p.m., I looked again. He was still there, same position, same distance, still not moving. This time I stared longer. I tried to make out his features, but the rain blurred everything beyond 20 feet. What I could see was dark clothing, heavy and sagging from the water, a hood maybe, or wet hair. His face, I couldn't make it out. It wasn't turned exactly toward me, but not fully away either, like he was looking just past the window. I watched for a full minute. He didn't even blink. Eventually, I pulled the blinds shut. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That a man was standing outside in the storm? Even if I had called the police, they wouldn't have come. Not during a flood. That night, I stayed in bed with my headphones on and my eyes toward the ceiling. I didn't fall asleep until dawn. Saturday, the flood deepened. Water filled the courtyard like a drained pool being refilled from the bottom. I'd placed towels under my door. Most people had already evacuated or left to stay with family, but I'd stayed. My reasoning felt logical at the time. The water hadn't reached my door, my power was still on, and the forecast said the rain would taper by Sunday morning. But the real reason? I didn't want to open the door. At 11:42 a.m. I looked again. He was closer, exactly 5 feet closer, still outside the sidewalk perimeter, but now almost directly in line with my window. He hadn't walked there. I never saw him move. He just shifted, not drastically, but enough to know it wasn't my imagination. This time I stared longer, counted seconds, watched the raindrops filter across the glass. He didn't move, not 1 millimeter, but he was breathing. You know how you can tell when someone's alive even when they're motionless? The tiny rise of the chest, the slow, unconscious balance of posture. He wasn't a mannequin, and he wasn't a trick of the light. He was alive, and he was watching something, not directly, but near me. I pulled the blinds closed, drew them tighter than before, but every hour after that, I looked again, each time 5 feet closer. By nightfall, he was standing just outside the glass, not pressed against it, not peering in, just standing, soaked, still, eyes just slightly downcast, waiting. I slept in the bathtub that night. I didn't want to be near the windows or the door. The power flickered around 2 a.m. I'd already unplugged everything and filled the tub halfway with water, just in case the city water got shut off. I curled into myself against the cold porcelain and waited for the sun. Somewhere around 5 a.m., I heard the sound. Not rain, not thunder, a gentle splash from my living room. I sat up. For a moment I thought the water had breached the door. Maybe the entire apartment was flooding, but I hadn't heard anything loud. No creaking, no sudden rush. I stepped barefoot out of the tub, grabbed a towel, and moved slowly down the hallway. Everything smelled wet. When I turned the corner, I froze. On the laminate floor, just inside the front door, were 2 footprints. Bare, human, wet. They didn't trail anywhere, no drip path, no signs of someone walking in. Just 2 clear prints, as if someone had stood there for a while, then vanished. I dropped the towel, pressed my back to the wall and stared at them. They weren't muddy, not gritty like floodwater would make. They were clean, clear, just water. I backed into the kitchen and grabbed the first object I could find. A steak knife. My hand was shaking. I didn't open the door. I just checked the locks. Deadbolt, chain, reinforced slide bar, all still in place, still locked. I leaned down and pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. No breathing, no shuffling, just the distant hush of the storm continuing to fall. I moved back into the living room, careful not to step near the prints. I didn't want to disturb them. I didn't want to test if they were real. Instead, I walked around them in a wide circle and curled up on the couch. Knife in hand, eyes on the door. I didn't blink for what felt like an hour. By 8 a.m., the water in the courtyard had stopped rising. But the prints were still there, unchanged. It wasn't until a week later that I found the articles. They weren't mainstream, mostly old forums, scattered PDFs from psychology journals and niche researchers cataloging anomalous perceptions during disasters. One paper mentioned something called environmental silhouettes. Another used the term static proximity entities, figures that appear only under certain visual occlusion, rain, fog, floodwaters, and maintain presence without action. Without explanation, most reports came from survivors of urban floods, ground-level tenants, isolated witnesses. The commonality? Stillness, not just from the figure, but from the observer. The longer you stayed still, the clearer they became. Like attention was permission. One account said, "The man appeared only when I stopped moving, and he never left until I did." Another described a figure outside a second-floor window, motionless until the floodwater reached his knees. Then he wasn't there. He was somewhere else, inside me, in the silence. I read until my eyes burned. That morning, the same morning the water finally receded, I opened the door for the first time since Thursday. The sun had returned. Shallow puddles clung to the cracks in the concrete, and bits of trash floated down the street in small, winding rivers. But no one was outside. No neighbors, no cars, no city workers. Just silence and the fading echo of water. The footprints inside were gone. I stepped carefully onto the front path. Then I saw it, etched, not scratched but carved, into the soft edge of the concrete sidewalk just below my window. You kept looking. Now I'm in. The letters were narrow, precise, like they'd been traced slowly with something sharp. I stared at them for a long time. I didn't touch them. I didn't try to wash them away. I moved out the next day. I left most of my things behind, furniture, clothes, even my TV. I didn't care. I haven't returned since. And now, even when it rains lightly, even when I'm far from home, I keep the blinds shut, because I know what happens when you look, and I know what happens when you look again. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. The rain started only over my house and never stopped. This happened to me in the summer of 2021. I was living in a small single-story house on the northern edge of Portland, the kind of neighborhood where people keep to themselves. Lots of overgrown yards, old sheds leaning into fences, and front porches with broken mailboxes nobody ever fixes. The house I was renting sat on a dead-end street with no streetlights and no sidewalk. It was cheap and quiet, and I liked it that way. It started on a Monday. I remember because I was working from home and had the back door open for airflow. Around 3 p.m., I heard a change in the ambient sound. A shift, like the hush of air before a downpour, but sharper. I stood up and looked through the kitchen window. It was raining, not unusual for Portland, but something about it felt wrong. The rain was only falling in my yard. My neighbor's driveway was dry. The trees behind the fence weren't moving, just my space, a column of rain, narrow and focused, falling with surgical precision over my roof and lawn. I stepped outside. The drop-off was immediate. One step out of the gate and the rain stopped. I looked up. The sky was pale, grey-blue, scattered with high clouds, not stormy, not even dark enough for rain. I held my hand out into the air. Dry. I pulled it back. Rain. Localized. Isolated. Mine. I thought maybe it was a leak in something above, a broken pipe or sprinkler, but there was nothing over the house. No high-rises, no scaffolding, just sky. By evening, it was still raining. Just over me. I texted my landlord. He didn't reply. The next day, the same thing. By now, I'd started filming it. I stood out front and captured footage of the rain falling only on my property line. I uploaded a video and sent it to a friend who worked for the city's public utilities department. He called me and said, "I've never seen anything like that. Could be atmospheric venting or a pressure system anomaly, but that localized. You'd need lab conditions." I didn't know what to say. By Wednesday, it hadn't stopped. The rain didn't intensify or slow. It just stayed constant, like a shower set to medium. Not hard enough to flood, but enough to soak everything. My lawn turned sponge soft. The shingles on my roof darkened and began to sag. My front porch creaked under the weight of endless droplets. At night, I heard it more clearly, the way it never stopped. There's something unnatural about uninterrupted sound. The brain wants variation, wants breaks. But this rain never faltered, not for a second. By the 4th day, I bought cameras. 2 outdoor motion sensor units and 1 indoor security cam for the hallway. I wasn't afraid of burglars, I just wanted proof. I wanted something to help me see what I couldn't explain. I installed the outdoor units that night and left them running. The next morning, I downloaded the footage. I watched it at my kitchen table. At first, it was what I expected, rain falling in a tight perimeter, isolated. But when I scrubbed through the nighttime clips, I noticed something I hadn't heard in real time. There was no impact, no patter, no splash, just the visual of rain, but the sound was reversed, like suction, as if instead of hitting the roof, the drops were being pulled inward, into the house. The audio waveform showed a strange pattern, a deep, pulsing dip every few seconds, sub-bass level. I boosted it and played it on a loop. It sounded like breathing. I switched to the indoor footage. Around 2:11 a.m., the hallway camera caught something strange, not movement exactly, but moisture. A slow shimmer forming on the inside of the hallway wall, not dripping from above, just blooming from the surface, like condensation under skin. It didn't spread, it didn't move, it just appeared, as if something on the other side had pressed a wet hand against the wall, and then vanished. That was the night I stopped sleeping. By the end of that week, I was losing track of time. I didn't leave the house anymore, I couldn't. The rain would soak me within seconds, and it wasn't just inconvenient, it felt different on my skin. Not cold, not warm, but heavy, like it wanted in. I wore the same clothes every day, my laundry hadn't dried in days, and my towels felt permanently damp. It was Friday when the objects started changing. It began with my shoes. I'd left them by the door like always, dry, untouched. But when I went to put them on that afternoon, the inside lining was soaked. Not the outer shell, not the floor around them, just the insoles, as if they'd been filled with water and then drained. I thought maybe a leak had dripped in, but the ceiling above was bone dry. I pulled the shoes off and set them aside, tried to ignore it. That night I brushed my teeth, Same routine, same toothbrush I'd used for years. When I pressed it to my mouth, I tasted salt. The bristles were wet, drenched. My lips stung slightly. I rinsed it and tried again. Same thing. When I held it in front of me, dripping, I realized it wasn't water. Not normal water. It didn't bead like tap water. It clung, mucosal, sluggish. I dropped it and left it in the sink. I tried sleeping again, couch this time, but sometime around 3 a.m. I woke up freezing. The blankets were dry. The air was still. But something felt off. I stood, walked down the hall, and opened the bedroom door. A puddle. Right beneath the bed. I stepped closer. The carpet squelched. I lifted the edge of the mattress. Nothing above. No ceiling damage. No dripping. But the underside of the box spring was soaked. I flipped on the flashlight and examined it closer. The moisture wasn't from above. It had formed underneath, between the slats, like something had pressed up from the floor. I checked the crawl space the next morning. Bone dry. I didn't touch the bed again. Instead, I started to notice a pattern. The water wasn't random. It wasn't from the outside. It only appeared when I touched something. My jacket, wet inside the sleeve. My phone, screen fogged. My keys, damp between the teeth. Every object I interacted with, soaked, but only after contact. As if the moisture was waiting, not leaking, waiting. I stopped trying to fix it. The rain never stopped. The city never replied to my emails. My landlord never called back. By the second week, I wasn't sure what day it was. The outdoor cameras had stopped recording. Every clip was corrupted. Water distortion across the lens, like static. The indoor unit still worked, but the battery died faster each day. I started rationing power. I spent most hours sitting on the floor, watching the corners, reading. That's how I found The Study, a PDF buried in an obscure psychology archive, authored by someone at a university I'd never heard of. Title, Climatic Displacement Phenomena in Isolated Individuals. It referenced microclimate disruptions as post-traumatic projections. The thesis suggested that, in some extreme cases, unresolved psychological trauma could externalize, not symbolically, but atmospherically. Localized weather changes, objects becoming emotionally reactive, moisture as memory, water as a physical medium for unspoken grief. It sounded ridiculous, but also right. I read the passage 3 times. Subject reported sustained precipitation over personal dwelling lasting 9 days. No meteorological explanation located. Symptoms included object saturation, humidity-triggered hallucinations, and inverted rainfall observed only during stillness. In final entry, subject claimed audible speech through bathroom drainage. Case classified unresolved. I closed my laptop, stared at the floor. I hadn't told anyone about the year before, what happened in that house with her. I hadn't spoken about it, not even to myself. I didn't want to know if that's what was coming back. That night, the lights flickered for the last time. The air felt dense, wet. I moved through the house slowly, checking each room. The rain on the roof had changed pitch, softer, less impact, more like trickling down from above, like it wasn't falling anymore, just seeping. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the sink. Nothing. Same with the tub. The pipes were dry, but when I leaned over the drain, I heard something. Not water, not gurgling, a voice, faint, from deep below. It didn't rise, it didn't echo. It whispered, "You made me rain. Now let me inside." Then the power went out, and the silence that followed didn't feel like absence. It felt like breath, held, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there. I haven't left the house since. Because it's not raining anymore, not outside. But every time I open a drawer, water spills out. Every time I speak, condensation forms on the mirror. And when I sleep, I dream of a face just beneath the surface, looking up from the drain. Still, patient, smiling.